Welcome to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. In this segment, Pat and James discuss why the deficit theory of communication is a failure, 3 key communication truths, 2 chiclets on a bed of rice, marketing at bars, weddings, and other social occasions, and where did Pat get her novelist's t-shirt?
Hey, James.
Yo, Pat.
Tell me something about the deficit theory of communication.
Oh. So you're just gonna jump right into the
I'm
tough
just jumping right in.
There's
Yeah.
how did you get up this morning?
There's no
Did you have a nice cup of
small
tea?
talk.
You know, no small talk. It's getting
small
right to the meat of the matter.
There's
So,
only big
all
talk.
right. So I need to acknowledge this came from a writing project that I worked on, and it's one of the things I love about being a ghostwriter and editor is I get to learn lots and lots of stuff. And so, this is part of a project we were talking about communicating science to people, and in particular. Climate change, and it was also during the time of COVID, so there was a lot of vaccine hesitancy that
Yeah.
science wanted to overcome. And one of the people I interviewed, and I'll try and put a link to her organization because while it talks about science, there's probably a lot of crossover and people might find it interesting. But she said we need to finally acknowledge that the deficit theory of communication has failed. It does not work, and we need to abandon it. Right. So immediately I'm like, what in the world is the deficit theory of communication?
Yeah.
Because she said it as if we should all know what it means. And we don't, and we should. And what it means is that when you approach somebody who's thinking you want to influence, say you want them to believe climate change is real, or you want them to, you want to reduce their vaccine hesitancy, the theory is that they have a deficit of information.
Okay.
And so if you just provide information, you will fill that deficit and that will influence their thinking, right? It'll get them, if they're sort of against you, it'll get them to change their mind. If they're unsure, it'll get them to see what they need to see and what the facts are pointing to. But it doesn't work, right? Because we've thrown out tons and tons and tons of facts at like climate change, but there's still huge numbers of people who resist it, refuse to believe that it's real, and there's lots of people that are just kind of apathetic about it. So we need a better way to communicate. And one of the reasons why I bring this up, or you bring this up, I think.
Yeah, I brought it up. Okay.
That there's a real marketing. Sorry, Pat. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Everyone should know Pat just had her COVID shot, so she's a little, she's a little edgy today.
Yeah. I got a killer headache.
But where I see the crossover for creatives is that it really is also about marketing too, right? And so if you feel like I just throw a bunch of information about myself out at somebody, they're going to see I'm the best person for the job, or they're going to see that I'm offering whatever it is, my music, my art, my writing, whatever it is obviously better, the best, however you want to phrase it. But that doesn't work. And so you need to have a more compelling way to talk about yourself, or to market your ideas or to express your ideas. And so, again, working with another person who is business consultant who made me aware of this, there's kind of the 3 things that people will believe, right?
Yeah.
So the first one, people will sometimes believe what you tell them. The second is people will often believe what people they know tell them. And the third is people will always believe what they tell themselves. And so the best marketing is marketing that hits those second 2, right? Somebody they trust telling them, they'll believe that more often and when they convince themselves.
Yeah.
And so from a marketing perspective, we want to get away from thinking we just need to provide information and that's enough to influence somebody's thinking or affect their thinking. And I don't want to use the word manipulate because it's not about manipulating people. It's more about helping people see your point of view,
Mm,
right? They can still disagree with you, right? But at least you're doing a better job of helping them see your point of view.
mm,
And that's always a good place to start. And for, when I think about those 3 questions, I often apply them in relation to a book proposal.
mhm.
And a book proposal is really a pitch, and pitching is something that every creative does. So I feel like this has general applicability.
Mhm.
And you have to do the first, right? You're obviously in any kind of pitch, you're going to be, telling people, "Here's what I have to say about myself."
Yeah.
But you wanna find ways to get people that they trust to hear too, and so that's you use these little blurbs, right? So you have an expert
Yeah.
in a certain domain say, "Yes, this is a very necessary book, and this is the right author
Mhm.
to craft this book." And then the third one is if it and this is more the totality of the pitch,
Mm.
excuse me, is it brings the person to a place where they convince themselves that you are the person they want to work with or are offering something they want to work with. And a great way to phrase it is that you are the unique owner of the solution to their problem,
Huh.
right? So in a book proposal, you're appealing to agents and acquisitions editors at publishers, and their problem is they need really, really good content that's going to sell books.
Yeah.
And so your book proposal is about presenting your idea and the book you have as, a very unique and very powerful solution to their dilemma, you
Mhm.
know. So that's basically that in a nutshell. But the obviously the challenge is taking this and putting it into real world use. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are because we all make pitches. We all have to pitch.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking it sounds like quite a specific situation. So the thought that popped into my head was that, let's say you're an artist and you were trying to get funding, or you're trying to sell somebody your art. You've already got a person who knows they want art, or who knows they have to give away money. So they're already pre-selected sort of by just their position to be open to communication. So we're not just talking about like you're telling the guy in the corner that you're an artist and this is the kind of stuff you do. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not actually what we're talking about right now, is it? It's you're telling somebody who's in a position to act um what
Yeah.
kind of stuff you do.
Yeah. Well, I think it can be generally applied, but really I think specifically it's about pitching, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And so if you're an artist, it's getting a gallery owner to see that there is value of taking your artwork.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So when you say telling, telling people, just giving people information, like the deficit theory doesn't work. If you're talking about global warming, just telling them, what the science is behind it. It doesn't have any effect on their decision making. Um, but when we're looking at the part where, you say, well, people will sometimes believe what you tell them. Is there a nuance to that? You're not just giving them information, you're telling them a story, maybe?
Yeah, well, I think, so deficit theory is really strictly about just providing data,
Yeah,
providing
yeah,
information, right?
yeah.
And that second set of where you have the 3 things that people will believe is trying to say, "Okay, if this isn't gonna work, what will work?" And
Mhm.
then understanding what people will believe will help lead you to a better story.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, I think that I mean, it makes sense. It's kind of, it kind of interacts with the idea that, there are some very specific jobs, like an art gallery owner or an acquisitions editor, where it's their job to listen to people's talk about their work with an eye to buying it or, representing it or whatever. But that's not, there's more to it than that. And so I think it's kind of good to really, ah, my sister Jane, she talks, we use the term unpack sometimes.
Yeah.
Let's unpack this, and she's like, I used to hate that term because I did, what the hell are you talking about? But then somebody she works with said, yeah, it's like unpacking a suitcase, what's really in there? And so I think, the whole communication thing is so wide and deep. And for my experience of any kind of pitching that I do is it's almost accidental. It seems so serendipity based, like yes, I know what I'm working on, but I almost never go out and try and get anybody to buy it, which is kind of
Well, well, I would push back maybe or ask the question, you know, that may be how somebody first comes to you, but then you've got to close the deal, right?
yeah, yeah,
You've got to
yeah.
communicate in a way that builds trust and a recognition that you're going to be the best person for what they're looking for.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so if we're talking about providing a, creative adjacent service, in my
Mhm.
case, it's developmental editing. Yeah, I have on my homepage of my website, I have testimonials from previous clients, and they're not the bad ones. My mom, my mom said, this is a few years ago. She's like, and so you would put a mixture of responses, and I'm like, no, that misses the whole point. Actually, I've never had anybody complain about my work, but you're not going to put that was so so on your website. So yeah, I have that sort of social proof element right up front because it's such a wide world of people who've been laid off from traditional publishing who have, they can put a bestseller in their portfolio, but even if they just touched it on its way to the mailroom kind of thing. So I have to have actual writers that I've worked with um, attest to the fact that I'm a good editor. Um, with my own creative work, like writing, I'm still actually quite unfamiliar about how to talk about it in a way that makes somebody want to read it. Um, I was in a bar in Vancouver. Gosh, was it? It was in the spring with my buddy Doug, and we were talking to these guys. I'd never met them before. They were friends of a friend of Doug's, and one of them said, "Okay, tell me about your book." And I was like, uh," because I'd written it really fast, and I, wasn't sure what it was about. Yeah, and then I was like, "It's about homelessness," and he's like, "I don't want to read that. Tell me again." And he just kind of he had me keep pitching it to him until he's like, "Okay, I'd read that one." Uh,
Yeah.
and it was the same
Yeah.
story the entire time. I just didn't, I went from it's this very general thing to a very specific thing that kind of riffed off his own experience of living in Vancouver. So, where am I going with this? I think it's a huge, like, really interesting topic, and I can see how, if you're not used to talking about your work with an eye to getting people to read it or look at it or, buy tickets to it, then you might think, oh, just talking about this is talking about how to manipulate people. But it's not. It's about how to express what's actually going on. And also, yes, you have to have social proof. I mean, and getting blurbs, talking about books here, getting blurbs is one of those things where, writers can be very some writers are aggressive about it and will ask basic strangers, who have a good name, like who are famous, more famous than them, and then others are so hesitant that they never ask.
Mhm.
And it's, I subscribe to Poets and Writers, Home
Mhm.
of the Stenchers, and, there's so many, every once in a while, there's a little piece on, "I got asked for 300 blurbs last year," stuff like that, and why people don't give them anymore, and, things like that. So it is kind of it's kind of a complicated area, and I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, except that I think it's the part that's really interesting to me is that people will believe what they tell themselves. And I
Mhm.
have just found that to be very true in my own experience. I told myself I had to start going to the gym and I believed it.
Mhm.
And so I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you think about things that you buy, right? There's some part of it where you have a need that I need something that's gonna boil water for my tea, and I need it to be relatively quick and not take up a lot of space and not be a gigantic pain in my ass and blah blah blah. So when you go to the store, you're looking for, what's gonna fulfill that.
Yeah.
And any marketing or communication, and I think, communication, we should sort of say that this is really about communication.
Mhm.
So you're gonna seek out that thing that best solves your problem. And
Yeah.
so what this is all about is communicating in a way that best positions you as the solution to a problem,
Yeah,
right? And
without
so I
creating
said it's
other problems.
yeah, and I think that's a great story about your friend, was it Doug? Saying, "Tell me about your book," and he's, "I'm not gonna buy that book." And then
Yeah,
you
no, it
come
wasn't Doug, it was this guy I'd never met before that I happened to be sitting
yeah.
next to. So, but it was Doug was there. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I think that's awesome,
Yeah, it was
and
great.
maybe a great exercise that people could do, get a friend to just be like, force me to convince you
Yeah, 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 yeah,
kind of,
yeah.
and I think so one, this is very much about communication,
Yeah.
right? And it's about communicating what you do, but it's also communicating its effect, right? What is
Mhm.
its and that can be, anything from a short story or a specific piece of art or a song or what have you, saying this is why this is good to get
Mhm.
somebody to read it, listen to it, look at it,
Yeah,
and do it in a way that isn't just glancing,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But you get a good read, you get somebody who's really gonna take a minute to kind of absorb what you're doing with a painting or with a song and all these kinds of things. And I think there's a certain piece of this too that speaks to setting aside humility a little bit,
yeah, oh,
where
for
we
sure,
do
yeah.
this humility and have that as a value.
Mhm,
But at the same time, like you said, some people don't ask for blurbs,
mhm.
but you need to do that to be able to, it's an important piece of of how we sell things or how we communicate things.
Yeah, it is now, for sure. Oh, it has been forever, actually. I remember, was it Edgar Allan Poe asked Charles Dickens to blurb his story, and Charles Dickens was like,
Mhm.
"Nope."
Wow.
I don't know where I read that somewhere. So who knows? But yeah, it's okay. So sometimes the thing that you're talking about, like whatever it is
Mhm.
that you do, sometimes the way you talk about it, you can say, "Oh, I just sold one to," trying to think of somebody non-objectionable that's well regarded. I can't think of anybody. I just sold one to James Buchanan. He loves this stuff, and they'd be like, "Well, so what?" Let me think of somebody else. I just sold one to. Can't think of
Well,
anybody who's not a.
John Irving isn't buying anything right now.
Well, he can't. He's in the basement.
Yeah, he's in the basement.
Okay, so you can say, "Oh, that's kind of social proof," so and so, like everybody that pops into my head is either in jail or being investigated. I don't know. I don't even watch the news. I don't know where this stuff's coming from. But because I was gonna say, anyway, never mind. Puff Daddy just bought bought 3 of my paintings. That's not a recommendation.
Well,
Um,
we could go with my 2 favorites, Marissa Tomei and,
Ryan Gosling.
Ryan Gosling.
Ryan Gosling just bought 3 of my paintings. Okay.
Yeah.
So you could say that. That could be part of it, or you could talk about how you made something, which is also a way of. It's probably more in the first category. You're giving somebody information, but it's also bringing in that sort of story and maybe just out of curiosity, they'd look at um, the thing, "Oh, I made this. I just saw a Paris catwalk show with, like, every single dress was made out of toilet paper or something, and they looked amazing." And I'm like, "Okay, well, it's a gimmick, but it's also, that's the only reason I looked at the dresses."
Yeah. Yeah, and, and I think part of that too is you've gotta, refine, you know?
Yeah,
It's something that we do anyway, it's part of our nature, it's part of the work of
yeah,
creation that you're constantly refining, but that way that you approach people needs to be constantly refined too.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's the part that I find to be the most annoying, gigantic pain in the neck um,
Well, because you're
kind of
vulnerable, right?
thing. Yeah. Well, it's vulnerable, but it's also, I'd rather be doing something that feels more high value. And I guess maybe I need to have a mindset shift where I start to place a little bit more value on that.
Yeah.
It's it's like my desire to not read directions.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Well, and the part of the grant experiment is learning how to talk about your stuff
Yeah.
in a way that makes people wanna fund it, which
Yeah.
is slightly different from wanting to buy it. Well, it's a lot different, but not that different actually, and I'm just thinking of this time I went to a local writing festival. It's called the, Surrey Writers Festival, I think, and, there's this agent that comes every year. His name's Donald Moss. His wife is,
Mhm.
Sarah Moss. She's got this
Yeah.
giant bestseller right now, Court of
He's got a bunch of giant
Throne
bestsellers.
and something, something, something. Anyway, something and roses, crown and thorns and roses, guns and roses. I don't know. And so I had an appointment to pitch him this historical novel I'd written. And I tell you, I thought I had a pretty good short description, right? But the pitch
Uh,
session was 10 minutes. And so the night before, I have never been that nervous in my life. I was in, because I got a hotel room because Surrey is close, but it's not that close. And I was just like, holy shit, I need a scotch, and then I need another one, and, uh, and then I was pacing back and forth. I was watching the shopping channel. I was, like, hyperventilating, and nobody was in the room. It was just me, and I'm not normally like that, you know? Normally, I'm pretty chill, and then the next day, I went to my appointment, and, he was this really nice man, and I told him I had, looked into his website, and I was like, "Okay, well," because he'd mentioned he's looking for more novels like
mhm.
this, so I said, "This is, this strikes me as what you're looking for." And then I told him the story, and then he said, "What happens in the middle?" And I'm like, Oh, huh? Huh?" Because I didn't have a deep enough explanation figured out. I didn't even know what
Yeah.
happened in the middle, So it was it's a fucking novel. Nobody ever knows what happens in the middle. So but just that was kinda like the thing in the bar with my buddy Doug's acquaintance. It was like, "What?" Now I see it as a favor for somebody to go,
Uh,
"That's not good enough. Try again?" But back
yeah.
then, I saw it as kind of like, "This is a very stressful situation. I would don't wanna be here right now." Um, and and so I think just getting comfortable. I'm sure people in Hollywood are super comfortable with just having to make it sound like they know what the fuck they're talking.
Well, they have a vernacular, right?
Mm,
And so, in Hollywood movie world, the vernacular is kind of based on it's this meets that, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
short.
that's like the quickest shorthand that they've come up with to be able to give somebody a very strong sense of what it is
Yeah,
they're about to pitch. And in publishing, it's explores the intersection of this and that,
I
right?
know. Yeah,
And it
I know,
and
but
it's
that see, that
like,
when you go
but
back
that
to info, that's not enough?
oh no, that's like, gets your toe in the door to then be able to say, and here's what
Oh,
says about it.
okay.
But it's also like, if you know the vernacular and you have done it before and have a little bit of experience, you get a little bit better at being the bullshitter too, right?
Mm.
So when somebody says, "Well, what happens in the middle?" You say, "Well, it's an existential examination of the
Oh, fuck.
historical, blah blah blah."
You would have punched me in the face.
And then
That
they go
sounds
full
fake.
of shit, right? And
Yeah.
you fuck, and you walk out of there feeling like shit, and then you go come up with something, really good. And that's the creation process, right?
Okay, well, I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to try and do the
No,
bullshitting part,
no.
but, yeah, so it is kind of learning how to talk about what you do in a way that isn't just giving information, but is also persuasive on some level without being fake. It's
Yeah,
an art all by itself, and it's not even really marketing. It's more of a way to, I mean, it is, obviously, it's a tool you
yeah.
would use in marketing, but what it also is it clarifies the project to you, to,
Mhm.
forces you to connect what it is, what the project is with how you feel about it and what you think about it and what you think it does in the world because, the world is the
Mhm,
one who's buying your stuff, right? So
mhm.
if it doesn't do anything, like dresses made out of toilet paper, fascinating. I mean, if the zombie apocalypse came, we could all look like
We
Marie
built
Antoinette.
style. Yeah. Well, and I wanna there's a step further that it's about appealing to a gatekeeper so that you get your opportunity to then appeal to the larger audience, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
But you
uh
never know who the gatekeeper is, too. So, like, what if you're talking to somebody at a party and they say, "What's your book about?" Or, "What's this? What's that?" And you tell them, and then that turns out they're the brother of the gatekeeper.
right. Yeah, well, I mean, there's definitely, the Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross theory, which is always be selling, right?
Hmm.
And so there's a certain very cheesy 80s greedy businessy kind of vibe to it.
Hmm.
But at the same time, how many times have you been in a room or you've gone somewhere and you meet somebody and there's this what do you do?
Yeah.
Kind of question. You're like, well, I write. What do you write?
Yeah.
At that point, it's good to have a little quick something that you can say
Yeah.
as opposed to, oh God, probably crap because nobody's buying it. Or you know what I mean?
Or I don't even know.
Yeah.
It's
Or I
weird.
God, who knows? Whatever anybody will pay me to do, kind of thing.
I just say I write weird stuff.
Yeah.
It feels like, okay, they're never gonna buy a book anyway, so, who cares?
Yeah. No, and that's cool. It's like I write weird stuff says a lot more than, oh, I don't know, whatever. And a lot of people will do that. I'll run
Yeah,
into people and somebody will say, this happened at Creative Mornings a
yeah.
week ago. And
After the chanting or
somebody there
before?
was, what's that?
After the chanting or before?
Yeah, before the chanting. This was
Oh.
pre-chanting. So, and yeah, pre-chant. And I asked, she says, well, I'm an artist. And I said, what do you do? And she was kind of like very vague about it. Like I didn't get there was no resonating memory of what she had to say about
Yeah,
herself.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And whereas the woman sitting next to her, I think was either maybe a writer or maybe she was, I can't remember exactly what she did, but she resonated with me because I mentioned the podcast and she
Mm.
says, oh, what is it called? And I said, Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. And her first words out of her mouth were, I'm too old to have delusional ambitions.
No kidding.
Yeah. And I said, no, you're not.
Yeah, yeah,
I,
yeah.
I I guarantee you've got a delusion in you. And she goes,
Yeah.
no, I don't. And we got into this little argument. And so I
That's how to get
remember
listeners.
that, right? And so I don't know what I'm exactly saying, but
Well, let me try this. I think what you're saying is that the first woman's response, she was so vague about what she worked on, that, it didn't wake up anything in your mind or your heart or anything. Whereas, I've sat like even my dentist, okay? So I broke my 2 front teeth when I was a little kid. And I've had caps my whole life, basically, those 2 front ones. And I went to get them redone. This was several years ago. And I got the consultation. And one of the reasons I love this dentist so much is she said, cosmetic dentistry is my passion. And I was like, how weird is that? In my head, I didn't say that out
yeah.
loud. Um, because I just thought, that's amazing that that could be somebody's passion. That's wild. And yeah, so we went through hell together because the first color was a mismatch. She didn't have natural light in her office. So
Wow.
we were all
And
like, yeah.
you can be tough. I mean, let's be honest here.
What do you mean?
I'm sure you were in there. It probably got pretty tough.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to like it, but the color, I got home and looked in the mirror and went, oh my God. Then I phone left a message that said that my new teeth are like chiclets on a bed of brown rice. The two compared to my other teeth. She did them again for free. And I went right to the lab and they matched them in full daylight. And so it was a whole different experience. But anyway, where was I going with that?
Yeah.
I think so I was at a different party, back when parties were, a thing
Yeah.
pre-COVID, and I was talking to this woman, and we were talking. talking about what we did. So I told her I'm an editor. I don't even bother saying I'm a writer to people because, then they're like, "Oh, where can I get your book?" And I'm like, "Well, nowhere." I mean, I did have one published this year, but the ones died a stillbirth. So most of them.
Yeah.
So I was talking to her and she said, "Oh, I measure." She said, I work for a flooring place, and I measure dimensions for industrial buildings that need flooring changed." I'm like, "How cool is that?" Right? And so there was something about this image of this really cute woman, really fun to talk to, going into some giant old warehouse and the laser measuring thing, and that's her job, right? And I was like, that's a cool job. And we had a good half-hour talk about her job because she just
Mhm.
hit me. The way she talked about it, she was a lot more, she had a lot more clarity than what I just conveyed, but it was just it has to hit the person you're talking to like you give a damn.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, so the woman at Creative Mornings who really didn't have much to say about herself didn't resonate. And then the woman who was like, I don't have delusional ambitions. I remember her, but only because it sparked a little bit of an argument between her.
Because
But
you didn't like that answer? What if she really didn't have delusional ambition?
well, that's fine. But that wasn't really how the conversation started. It was more
Yeah.
kind of like, what do you do?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and so she, went down that avenue. But
Certain amount of bitterness in that answer, I feel.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Been through the rinse cycle of life kind of thing. But then you have the example of the dentist who's like, "Oh, my passion is
Cosmetic.
cosmetic."
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, I mean, what does the gastroenterologist say, right?
Right? Nematodes
Yeah,
all the way.
yeah, nematodes. I'm all into the nematodes.
Never met a nematode I didn't like.
Yeah, I love them. And but I would, push back on you, when somebody asks you what you are and you say, well, I'm an editor, right? I'm sure you have a great response to that, but I would say, if, why not say you're a writer? And it's interesting that you said, because I don't have a book to point to,
I do now.
and you do now,
Yeah.
right? Um, but that brought up this question of, all right, well, what does a writer look like? Right? Does a
Huh?
writer look like somebody who has stacks and stacks of books published by the big five, or does it look like somebody who's actually doing the work of writing and pushing themselves forward? And
Yeah. Well, I do write all the time. So in that way I'm a writer. It really depends how I'm feeling when somebody asks me how much I think they care, how much I want them to know about me,
Mhm.
stuff like that. Like the guy who gave me my COVID shot, I told him I was a writer. Like he asked me, well, I was wearing a
Okay.
t-shirt that said novelist that I got for free. And he's like, "Do you write novels?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Wasn't like, eyes up here, buddy. Eyes up, buddy.
No. He was a delightful young man. Anyway, so yeah, it depends. I think what I'm feeling is you know, nobody can be excited about working with you if you're not excited about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so nobody can be interested in buying your stuff if you're not interested in making them want to buy it.
Right.
And then,
Right.
so of course there's exceptions, there's outliers, JD Salinger or whatever. He wasn't out there flogging books, he wasn't going to signings. Um, that's one person, there's hundreds of thousands of other people who are actually making it part of their creative work to sell the
Mhm.
shit they create, because otherwise you just get a basement full of stuff.
Right.
If you have a
Right.
basement.
Right. If you're lucky enough to have a basement.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think, it also, we talked about that place of authenticity, and I think authenticity also leads to specificity.
Oh, that's good.
And
Let me write that
so,
down.
because you don't want to be vague about it, because you really want to convey what it is that either animates you in your writing or animates your writing,
Yeah.
right? So for me, I have a big thing about I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia, and I
Yeah.
just hated it. I hated being in a suburb.
Mm,
And so a lot of my writing kind of is about suburban people,
yeah.
right? And then
Angst.
I overheard, and so I can't, I've come up with this shorthand of saying, oh, explored the ennui of domestic bourgeois life, right? As a way to talk
Riveting.
about it, which is also kind of that, like, tell me something more. And it's like, you know what? I get really, really interested in and kind of a little excised by, suburbia. And, it's not that everybody in suburbia is lame or suburbia itself is necessarily lame, but you can fall into these cliques and these way of behaving within, the group and that kind of thing. And so to me, I find that interesting
Mm,
to write
yeah,
about, right?
that's
And
cool.
so that feels talking about my writing that way feels a lot more authentic in person. But when I'm going to pitch it to a literary journal or whoever, an agent or something, I'm going to use exploring domestic bourgeois life because that's kind of what they want to hear, you know, or at
I,
least it feels like that's kind of what they want to hear. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
can I
I very much
suggest
wrong on that.
I suggest injecting a little excitement into that description,
Yeah.
exploring the shit show that is domestic bourgeois life.
I'm writing that down.
I don't know if it's a shit show. I mean, what's bourgeois, what's domestic?
Well, you
I
know,
know I know what you mean though. Yeah.
I mean, any interesting thing has something about it that rouses emotion. And so in
Yeah.
writing, it's conflict. And I like to set people up and then, characters up
Yeah.
and do really horrible things to them.
Yeah, your poor old Bumble. Okay, so I think we're getting to the bottom of this, whatever this is, which is to say we understand why the deficit theory of communication is not enough. It doesn't really work. It's not
Yep.
persuasive on a science level because there's something else that people need in order to believe the information
Mhm.
they get. So even if it's from a trusted, like let's say the Center for Disease Control or something, and let's say the person is not a crank, right? They're not just
Mhm.
you know um, they don't have a. Never mind, I was going to say something rude, but uh, so
Oh, I
So
wish
they
you.
just say it's from a trusted source. There's just information. I see that a lot actually there's been this campaign in the last few years in Vancouver. There's one for the Children's Hospital, and it shows. Oh, I shouldn't have said what it's for because the campaign shows like a little kid and an old man, and it's like Jerry. Jerry wants the heart surgery to go well, and if you're just looking at the pictures, you think it's the old man they're talking about, but it's the kid, right? So it
Yeah.
gives you this
Yeah.
moment of a shift in reality. And then there's
Mhm.
another one they did, which was like, don't speed past construction sites. Not the hospital. This was something different.
Mhm.
Because my dad works here, or my mom
Mhm.
works here, or my uncle works here. So they're just trying to humanize what people think of as just part of
Right.
the texture of living in a city, like hospital
Mhm.
or a roadworks. But I wonder that if the part where you people will sometimes believe what you tell them comes down to they're more likely to believe it if you seem to believe it or if you
Mhm.
feel invested in it. And then they will often believe what other people they trust tell them. Testimonials on a website, like they don't know those people, but if there's enough of them, there's a cumulative effect. It's like seeing
Mhm.
a product on Amazon that has 11,000 five-star reviews. You're like,
Mhm.
"Okay, well, it can't be terrible." Um, and then they always believe what they tell themselves. That's the really sort of deep one. Like, that's the
Yeah.
sophisticated one because
Yeah.
you're it forces you to think of when does somebody become convinced? At what stage, in their process with any kind of
Mhm.
product or artwork or whatever, do they become convinced that not only are they ready to
Mhm.
make the decision on it, but they're firm about making that decision. They've
Yeah.
decided to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's really, maybe that's more like the goal in a sense, is that the cumulative impact of what you're providing leads or helps a person kind of reach that place,
Yeah,
right? So what are the tools or ways or methods or, that's going to get somebody there?
yeah, yeah,
Um, and that's it's really hard, and it's hard in this creative world because um it's so intensely subjective,
yeah,
and what one person is going to place a high value on, another person may not.
yeah.
What one person is really going to like and say, hey, that's really a beautiful piece of work, another person will yeah, it's all right, but it's
Mhm.
not to me, uh, and so that makes it really, really hard, and that's where you have to get really good at sort of having a good process to get to a good communicating or communication message or way to communicate, so that you can feel like when you get somebody who says no, it's not, oh, I've got to change everything. It's
Mhm.
this just wasn't the right audience for
Yeah,
what is a good message, right?
yeah,
So and then but also be open to the fact that if somebody comes back with some comment that, maybe the message is off, and so you have
yeah.
to recognize that. And that can be really, really hard in this creative world, right? Um, because it's so incredibly subjective.
Yeah, and I think subjectivity of, art is a gift. It's
Mhm.
because that the fact that somebody is not interested in your stuff, it could be because you're not describing it well, or you're not um giving giving them enough of a reason to want to find out more. But the other part is they might just be the wrong person for your stuff. And so you can go away not feeling like, oh man, I just made this widget and it sucks. Um,
Right, right.
like it's got absolutely no use to anybody.
Mhm.
Widget meaning also thingamajig.
Yeah. And well, or what's it?
Or yeah, or doohickey.
Right.
Yeah, just to
Doohickey.
clarify, that's what we mean by
Yep.
widget. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Rube Goldberg device.
That's complicated widget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's next level widgeting.
Yeah, yeah, and what if you find out your entire creative output is one giant Rube Goldberg device?
Oh, I've long ago probably convinced myself that that's exactly where I'm at. It's,
Wait, I think it is. I just thought that now. The whole thing, the whole show of life.
that's that's what the podcast is about, is these mid-level Rube Goldberg devices, and we're trying to get out of that. We want to actually get somewhere with it,
How to
and
sell your pointless shit to
enough Rube.
anyone. All right, so what have we concluded? I feel like we've been talking about this for, I don't know, half an hour anyway.
Yeah. I think I think we haven't really concluded much.
We can't put into words what we've concluded.
We're yet again offering people listening a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts, and maybe a little bit of a framework, right? We've got the deficit theory doesn't work, so we have the three kind of, not questions, but things to think about. Um, and there's a lot of, you know, who are you going to approach? You've got to tailor the pitch, show, I guess, one crossover thing is cultural competency, right? So if you're speaking to an agent, for example,
Mm,
you want to speak in a way that they're going to get excited and understand. If you're
yeah.
speaking to a gallery owner, if you're speaking to, a music venue owner, all those kinds of things.
Mm,
And trying to maintain authenticity and not feel like you're a character out of Glengarry Glen Ross.
right.
Yeah, and have a little bit of confidence in yourself and what you're doing, and your ability to have a or a conversation about it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway for me is, and I've always kind of known, well, probably the last 5 years anyway, known that if you can talk about what you're working on so that people's eyes don't glaze over, that's a good thing.
Mhm.
Have I spent any time on trying to do that? Only recently when I started writing grant applications, and it's a definite skill. So
Yeah.
don't get discouraged if you can't do it easily right away. And honestly, I think if you can get straight feedback from anybody who's willing to have you not like them, especially if you're not used to pitching, like people who are used to pitching, and I include myself in that group, even though I don't pitch a lot, they'd rather have the truth,
Yeah. Yeah.
than just, oh, sounds great. But I'd like to be challenged on, well, that's a boring description. Can you say it another way? And then you have to come up with 5 different ways of saying it, and you're on your fourth beer, let's say, for example.
In this hypothetical.
You're the tail end of a pub crawl. But yes, I think it's a skill like anything else, and ancillary skills are absolutely necessary with creative work.
Yeah. And so you got to practice it. And as much as it feels like pulling teeth, back to our dental mode. Yeah, you got to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for listening to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. We'd love to hear how we're doing, so please leave a comment, join our chat page, or send us an email at giftedunderachievers@substack.com. And remember, we're on your favorite podcast platforms now, so look for us where you love to listen to podcasts. Have an awesome day.